All right, here comes the audience participation board. Of course, there is no audience in liturgy. Here comes the congregation participation. Knowing what's coming, do I tell the Sadducee joke or not? I don't know. You get to vote. What's the word? What's the vibe of the crowd here? They're scared. They're scared. They don't know. Okay, for Elizabeth's sake, the Sadducees, of course, do not believe in the resurrection, right? That's why they're sad, you see? So, yes, they call us Father because we can tell dad jokes. Winter, definitely here, at least until Tuesday, I'm told. And the liturgical year is winding down. Only 2 more Sundays before we start Advent. Very cool. And as we get to the end of ordinary time, you'll notice that the church asked us to contemplate the end of all time. And so we get these lovely readings about 7 brothers being executed in mean and nasty ways. Lovely readings, weren't they, to start your Sunday morning? Kind of grim. But did you notice what the emphasis on that particular reading from Maccabees is? Why are they going there with such courage? It's because of their belief in the resurrection. And as we are asked to contemplate the end of all time, in this light, it's not a bad idea to review the 4 last things. Kind of look and see what it is and contemplate the end times. 4 last things. You recall the 4 last things. There's actually 3 of them, but there's 4. But the last one is optional. So there's death, judgment, heaven, or hell. Okay, death, judgment, heaven, or hell. And in truth, I don't think any of us can really, and I came to this kind of early in life, I don't know why, but I don't think any of us can really begin to live fully until we come to terms with our own mortality. It's not like we dwell on it or something, but to come to terms with our own mortality. We don't think of it in the course of the normal day, however. It's kind of like when Father McGillicuddy walked into the pub there in Dublin, and Father McGillicuddy, very powerful figure, and he walks in and the music stops and everybody looks and everybody kind of looks at their pints and all the eyes kind of look at him and he booms out to the entire pub, "Who here wants to go to heaven?" And so all the guys raise their hand, except for Murphy back in the corner. So he goes back there, he says, Murphy, do you not want to go to heaven? He says, "Oh yes, Father, I do very much." "So why didn't you raise your hand?" "Well, I thought you're putting together the group to go right now." Now, we don't contemplate our own mortality in the normal course of the day. However, I suspect that many of us have done so in the wake of the recent pandemic. And I think living in the harsh reality and the harsh beauty of Alaska, that is Alaska, makes us pause from time to time. It is the reality of living here. Anyone who has lived here for any length of time has lost a friend or loved one to the wilderness. You might have heard of Bob Bell's book, "Oh No, We're Gonna Die," and it's a book of all of the stupid things he did in the wilderness that almost killed him. There was a second book, of which I have a chapter. The second book is called "Oh No, We're Gonna Die Too," because Bob wrote this book about himself, and everybody says, "Oh yeah, this happened to me, this happened to me, this happened to me." And so the second book is all of these stories that he collected from his friends and folks that had read the book and sent them in. And I'm the poem in that book that opens that book, by the way. No one is named in the book, but it is. It's a harsh beauty, harsh reality up here. And, so it is a reality of part of living here. And so I think it does cause us to ponder our own mortality from time to time. And, 28 years of ministry have also taught me, though, that the more familiar you are with death, the less scary it becomes. Now, there are certain people who have taught me how to die well as I've accompanied them to their passing. I can think of 3 or 4 right off hand. The moment of death can be a very grace-filled, very beautiful encounter. Deacon Jim Lee's wife, Maria, we were with one particular woman who was dying. It was an incredible experience. And she likened it, she who had 10 children, very much likened it to giving birth. There's a process. Things progress in a certain way. And she made that comment, and I can't argue with her. it's very insightful. And for the Christian, death is not something we hasten, certainly. But neither, as Paul says very well, neither is it something that we fear. As St. Paul says in another place, for we know if our earthly dwelling, a tent, should be destroyed, we have a building from God, a dwelling not made with hands, eternal in heaven. So death then, as we think about it, for the Christian, is simply the next step in the fulfillment of God's plan for us. It is the foundation, the next step in the fulfillment of our hope. Now, what is that plan for God? That God has for us? That plan is simply this, that we become what God has created us to be. Now, there's a subtle heresy, and and I'll just, as we read in the scriptures here, in the gospel today, there Jesus is very much teaching about the resurrection. And as we heard today, they were, the Sadducees were sitting here saying, okay, now, because remember, for them who don't believe in the resurrection, it's all about this world, this life, and so to carry your name, your legacy, you had to have children. Thus the question of the 7 brothers who died, leaving the same wife childless. But it's a facile question because it has no basis in the reality of what's going on. They're looking only at how things work in this world. Jesus is saying, no, you have to look beyond this world. They don't have the vision to do so. That's why they're sad in many ways. But he says the children of age neither marry nor remarry, but are deemed worthy to attain the coming age and to the resurrection of the dead. They can no longer die, for they are like angels, and they are the children of God because they are the ones who will rise. So there's 2 stages here. There's 2 stages. There is where the soul rests with God, where we are like angels in a way with the heavenly court, and then the fulfillment of that at the end of the age, at the resurrection of the dead. Now, there is a very subtle heresy out there in the world, but it's real, and that when we die, we human beings become angels. Well, and it makes for good Christmas literature. There was that one show, remember, Touched by an Angel? I'm dating myself. You guys can go look it up on Nickelodeon if you want, or you can stream it. It was a great show. And they had that wonderful woman with the Irish lilt and the red hair and just gorgeous. And she would say, and the angels would intervene in people's lives, and her message was always wonderful. She would say in every show, I am an angel sent by God to tell you that God loves you. Isn't that beautiful? One, because it's true. But it's a great message that we need to hear that God loves us. This is on primetime TV, how far we have fallen. But it limped theologically. Great show, but it limped theologically. Because angels are spiritual beings. They do not have a body. If anybody asks you how many angels can dance on a head of a pin, your response should be, well, that depends with the 4-piece jazz ensemble or the whole 40-piece orchestra. They don't take up time and space. They're spiritual beings. They don't have a body. Remember that insipid Nicolas Cage movie, City of Angels, where the angels actually envied the humans their bodies? I guess it's a good film for that reason. It has a stupid ending. But it's a fascinating question that the angels would envy the human beings their bodies. Because we are different. Human beings, we are not angelic beings, we are human beings. We have a body and a soul. This is why when Christ came to redeem us, he took on our human nature, body and soul, in the incarnation. God loving human beings so much, God became a human being, taking on a real human body, entering into the fullness of what is our human reality. Our bodies are very much a part of our reality. And by his own resurrection, then, of the dead, of the body, Christ has shown us what lies in store for all the baptized to remain faithful. This is our ultimate destiny. Thus, at the end of the age, these lowly bodies of ours, such as they are, and I'm hoping for when it's about 30 pounds lighter, are raised, and we become what God has intended us to be, perfectly human, body and soul. We don't metamorphosize into something else. We become what God has intended us to be, perfectly human, body and soul. And at that, the resurrection of the dead, we know there comes that next stage, that judgment. Particular judgment, general judgment. I won't get into those today just because of time. But suffice it to say that if we have remained faithful, then we do become what God has intended us to be. We enter into the realm of the blessed. And so it's important to remember that in talking about these last things, there's a temptation to see them as something distant and way out there, even centuries into the future, if not decades in the future as we contemplate our own mortality, but they're not. They're not. Our judgment at the end of the age and at the end of this life depends entirely on our relationship with Christ now and our relationships with others now and throughout the rest of our lives. The treasure in heaven that we have, nobody takes anything out of this life save this. What do we take with us but the relationships we have with Christ and with one another? And in the church we have a very special word for that relationship. It is called being in communion, united at the level of who we are. We tend to think of these things way out there at the end of the age. Our judgment at the end of the age, I said, depends on our relationships now. So in a very real sense, heaven begins now. For that matter, hell also begins now. Sad thing, though, as you know, is that God does not condemn anyone to hell. The sad reality that everyone that's there has freely chosen to be there. That's sad, isn't it? It's a matter of trajectory. If we enter into communion with Christ now and deepen that communion in the future, if we enter into communion with the church and everyone that now, then that communion goes into the future. That relationship continues and is fulfilled when we pass through the veil. If, however, we sever communion with Christ, then that is our fate. Remember, every saint has a past. Every sinner has a future. Let us set our eyes forward. Let us work on those relationships which are really our treasure in heaven, with Christ and with one another, in a very real sense. In a very real sense, the decisions we make now carry us into eternity. And I guess the last question we just kind of have to ask ourselves now is, how do you want to spend eternity? Smoking or none? Right, Amelia?